Now, the government has just come out and said that any parent who won't inoculate their children is not allowed funding, preschool funding for their children.
Well, that's a bit silly. That's like holding people to ransom. Yeah, I don't see the problem of people getting inoculation on the whole for most things. I don't bother with the flu vaccine because my immune system's pretty good, and occasionally I get a bit of a cold and I'm miserable as sin for a few days, and moan about it. But and I've heard of people who say, oh yeah, but when you get the flu injection, it brings on the flu. Well, not really. Well, it does and it doesn't. The flu vaccine brings on a mild version of the flu. Well, it may be a few minor symptoms if you're unlucky, right?
Yeah. Well,
that builds, because basically a vaccine is the injection of a controlled, cut-down version of the bug, right? So that your body builds up an immunity to it, right? Because your body's got to build up the immunity. It's not injecting the immunity into you, it's causing your body to create the immunity to something it can handle and beat, right? Now, for some people that means, I think my father's one, gives them a bit of a sniffly nose for a couple of days after the vaccine, and that's it, right? But for older people who maybe their immune system isn't fantastic, or they don't necessarily always eat the best, or whatever it happens to be, yeah, it's a good idea.
But how can this threat or this blackmail be reconciled?
Yeah, well, that's just us. I can understand the thing that they want to stop the spread of measles and blah blah blah, and saying, well, you're not going to get funding for, but saying you're not going to get funding for preschool and that if you don't have the immunisation, I think is wrong, because encourage people to do it, make sure they're properly educated, but there are going to be some people out there who have a legitimate reason for not immunising, be it maybe religious views, but there's also the fact that some people's health might be such that the immunisation is going to cause them a problem because they've got some other ailment.
There's absolutely no reason, there's no health security reason at the moment for children to be forcefully inoculated. If there was some kind of outbreak where, like polio for instance, where it really affected people in a big way in the 30s and the 40s, then obviously we need a polio injection to stop it.
I do think people who decide to not inoculate their children need to keep in mind that if you refuse to inoculate your children, you then need to be understanding that a school may not want you to have your kids at that school during the peak season for that particular ailment when it's most likely to go around, or that you are required to produce a certificate of health to allow your kids into the school, to prove that your kids aren't actually ill at the time, because otherwise you endanger a lot of other kids. But
I mean, like, school kids are not told to stay home when they have the flu, are they? They go to school with flus.
No. And same with the common cold. But when it comes to other more severe things like chicken pox and measles and all those sorts of things, I could understand that if a kid is symptomatic, that the school then maybe require that child has a doctor's certificate to actually come to school
kids
to prove that they're...
Like, I don't have kids, and I don't know kids if kids are getting sick or not, but are kids still getting these things? Are they still getting germ and measles? And
oh yeah, there's still the ones that they're out. I think it's something like 5 or 6% or some relatively low amount of kids get it each year. I saw something on TV a while back about this, and it's a relatively low percentage, and so from that perspective, and of course it's not something that you necessarily need to die from now, like used to in the old days. Right. It does make a kid very sick, and if it's not caught early enough, there are other ailments that can come. They can get some of them. I think it's measles. You can get kids do run the risk of brain damage and things like that if it's not caught and dealt with quick enough, which is why they encourage the vaccination.
Right.
But I think instead of withholding funding for schooling and stuff, what they should be doing is working on educating, and then for those people who still insist on not getting it done, have them, if they've got a legitimate reason, then fine. There are those people that have a legitimate reason for not having it done.
Well, I mean, what the government is doing is anti-democratic, it's immoral. You can't, because the reason being is that wealthy families, middle-class families, don't have to worry. They can afford not to have funding.
Yeah.
It's only the really poor people who are being attacked again. And you can almost say that if there are side effects, it's the poor children who are going to suffer, not the wealthier children.
Yeah, admittedly, if they started saying, if you don't get the flu injection, then you have to pay full expenses and stuff for going to the doctor and all this sort of thing, I'd say, well, that's not fair, because on the whole, I know my immune system's good enough to handle it from previous history. But even I would be willing to revisit that as I get older. I would be willing to assess my immune system and the way in which my system deals with bugs and germs,